Today's episode is brought to you by .tech domains, and this one hits close to home. Back in 2016, I was building my startup and went hunting for that perfect .com and found next to nothing. So I did what every founder does, settled. Here's what I wish someone had told me. You're building a tech startup, just get a .tech domain. It instantly tells investors and customers what you're about. Don't overthink it. Secure your .tech domain today from any registrar of your choice. This episode is sponsored by Unblocked. Unblocked is the context layer your agents are missing. It synthesizes your PRs, docs, Slack, and tickets into organizational context that agents actually understand. So they make better plans, write higher quality code, use fewer tokens, and require fewer correction loops. If you're running Claude Code, Cursor, or any agentic workflow, Unblocked is worth a look. Learn more at getunblocked.com/codestory.
We're going to need a Kubernetes for agents. We're going to need a Linux for agents, right? There has to be an open standard for how you define and drive and monitor these agents at scale, both within an enterprise and as an individual developer. And I think OpenHands we're the largest open source project that has a full end-to-end solution there. It's not just a CLI, right? It's all the cloud infrastructure you need. It's all the scalability things, all the sandboxing, et cetera, all the security. That I think I'd like to see OpenHands really become the standard there and have engineers all over the world trained on how to use OpenHands effectively. I'm Robert Brennan, and I'm the CEO of OpenHands.
This is Code Story, a podcast bringing you interviews with tech visionaries.
Spent 6 months moonlighting.
There's nothing on the back end.
Who share what it takes to change an industry.
I don't exactly know what to do next.
Took many goes to get right.
Who built the teams that have their back.
A company is its people.
The teams help each other achieve more.
Most proud of our team.
Keeping scalability top of mind.
All that infrastructure was a
Yes, we've been fighting it as we grow.
Total waste of time. The stories you don't read in the headlines.
It's not an easy thing to achieve, mind
Took
you.
it off the shelf and dusted it off and tried it again.
To ride the ups and downs of the startup life.
You need to really want it. It's not just about technology.
All this and more on Code Story. I'm your host, Noah Labhart, and today Robert Brennan is helping you scale from one to thousands of agents with an open platform for cloud coding.
This episode is sponsored by Mesmo. If your team is collecting large volumes of logs, metrics, and traces, but still struggling to get timely answers, Mesmo can help. Mesmo is an active telemetry platform that processes and enriches observability data in real time before it's stored or analyzed. That means lower data volume, lower cost, and faster root cause analysis across your existing observability tools. To see how it works, get a demo at mesmo.com/codestory. That's MEZMO.com/codestory. This episode is sponsored by BrainGrid. If you are building with AI coding tools, but your features keep breaking, you need to check out BrainGrid. It is the product management agent for AI builders. BrainGrid turns messy ideas into clear specs, tasks, and prompts that coding agents like Cursor and Claude can actually build the right way. Ship real software, not fragile prototypes. Start free at braingrid.ai. Robert Brennan grew up in Boston and loved it so much that he ended up calling it home again. He spent time in New York between the bookends, but he enjoys the chill pace and great music of Boston over the fast pace of the Big Apple. Outside of technology, he likes to read nonfiction and fiction, specifically science fiction. He loves music and has been playing guitar for 25 years now. He frequents the live music scene around Boston and even lives near a jazz club. Robert observed the release of the first version of Devin a few years ago, which was very exciting to see agent-driven development. But he and his co-founders were concerned with who was going to govern how this software was going to get written. And they hypothesized that it should be open source and community-driven. This is the creation story of OpenHands.
So we're working on an open source platform for AI-driven development. So every software engineer in the world right now is aware that AI is changing how we do our jobs. And we saw that change starting to happen almost exactly 2 years ago. I think big event there was Cognition released their demo video of Devin back in March of 2024. And that was really the first time we saw an agent that was working on code. It wasn't just a chat GPT inside of the chat window spitting out a function or something like that. We'd seen AI that could write code, but we'd never seen AI that could actually run the code that it wrote and then add debug statements to see what was going on and Google an error message that came out and basically do that whole inner loop of development until it got to a solution. That was really exciting to see, right? It solidified in my imagination what the future of software development was going to look like. But it was also a little scary that change was being pushed by this stealthy company coming out of a black box. And it was very obvious to me and my co-founders that, if the job of the software developer is going to be changing, the development community needs a say in how that change happens. So we started a project at the time called Devin, now called OpenHands, really with the goal of making sure that the community is able to guide this change to how software gets written.
Tell me about the MVPs, that first version of the product you built. How long did it take to build, and what sort of tools were you using to bring it to life?
Yeah, so my co-founder, Graham Newbig, who is a professor at CMU, he was actually the first one to write some code in the OpenDevin repo. And he created basically just an empty functionless front end that had a chat window and a terminal and a file editor. And it didn't really do anything yet, but it got people's imaginations going about, okay, what could this be? But it got the community excited, right? And everybody started contributing. And then I came in and wrote the first agent, which was basically like a long prompt and a for loop wrapped around an LLM. And that kind of got it to the point where it was functional, you could do a thing. I think my agent scored a 3% on Sweetbench, which is how they test how good these agents are. But it was enough to get people's imaginations going. And then our third co-founder, Xingyao, he came in, he was doing his whole PhD around code generation and coding agents, right? So he was one of the top experts on this particular subject matter. He came in, he threw away my agent, brought his own in, and immediately launched us to the top of the Sweetbench leaderboards. I forget what the numbers were. I think at the time it was something like 20% or 25% was state of the art for what percentage of the Sweetbench coding problems could be solved then. And that was really exciting. This was actually a useful agent. We started using it occasionally on a day-to-day basis at this point. And I think now we're at 80% of that problem set being solved by today's agents. So really huge leap from where we were in mid-2024 to today.
So you get to that point and you make those strides, right? Like you're describing, and you're getting the traction that you want, and you want to proceed. How did you progress and mature it from there? And I'm curious about how you built your roadmap. How do you go about deciding that, okay, this is the next most important thing to build or to address with OpenHands?
The really nice thing is we had just a ton of visibility with the community. Everybody swarmed on our repo, and we're trying it and checking it out and giving us feedback and opening up issues, opening up pull requests, etc. So we had a fire hose of feedback that we had to sort through. So it was really less about how do we imagine what to build next, and more how do we pare away all these requests that are coming in and figure out what are the most important ones, what are the most common pieces of feedback we're getting. And I would say our roadmap kind of split into two pillars. One was how do we get this thing better at writing code? How do we improve the quality of this thing so that it's useful not just occasionally, but useful as a daily driver? And it was by the end of 2024 was when it became my daily driver. It was something I was using every single day, because Xingyao and the research team that we built with Xingyao and Graham was really doing an amazing job of just making this thing better and better at solving coding problems, right? They were figuring out ways to help it interact with a local file system, to help it search through the existing code base, to help it manage its context window, all this research-oriented stuff to figure out how do you get this thing better and better at writing code and coming into an existing code base and making meaningful changes. And then the other half was really all about developer experience, all about how do we make this feel good for the developer who's actually piloting it. And that was more my side of the house on the product and developer experience side. I've been working in open source developer tooling for over a decade now. And that was a lot of just looking through the comments, figuring out where are people struggling with the setup, where are people struggling with looking at their conversation history and understanding what are they doing. If they're running 3 or 4 different agents at once, how are they keeping track of that? How are they responding when the agent gets stuck? So there's a lot of that like more product-oriented developer experience type stuff was the second pillar.
Let's switch to team. How did you go about building your team? And I'm curious about what you look for in those people to indicate that they are the winning horses to join you.
I think one of the nice things about being open source is that we actually had a huge community of developers who were already contributing. So one of our first hires was actually an open source contributor who we saw just doing great work inside of our repo. And we very quickly interviewed him and hired him. And he's been just a great asset for us. When we did put out job recs, we also had just a ton of interest because folks love open source. They see that this is the future of software development. They want to be a part of it. I think they get really excited about building for themselves, right? Building a product that's going to make them more productive. So we got just a ton of applications, and like weeding through those resumes was really tricky. But one of the things we did in our hiring process that has proven to be really great is in the early days, I was having folks do like a coding challenge in order to vet their technical skills. And I was literally having them write code inside of a Google Doc so I could see how they think logically. That's traditionally been the way that we test engineers, is have them write code on a whiteboard or do some kind of pair programming thing. I'd done some take-home challenges in the past too, where I was like, hey, go home and code up a little app and then show it off to us and take us through the source code. But what we did is we actually switched to having folks use AI to write the code rather than making them write code by hand inside of a Google Doc, which is much closer to how people are working these days. And that's been super, super successful. We get a lot more signal out of that. What we do is we have folks record their screen for 2 to 3 hours and build an application from scratch using whatever tools that they want. And they get a lot of leeway to, if they're a front-end engineer, they can really focus on design and front-end implementation, things like that. If they're more back-end oriented, they can focus on that. If they're more of a DevOps engineer, they can focus on the deployment strategy and CI/CD. So you can take it any way you want. There's a lot of creativity involved, and we get to see, how does this person think? How do they problem solve? And how do they use AI effectively to move faster? I mean, they can get a lot done in a few hours with AI coding tools at their disposal.
This episode is sponsored by BrainGrid. Building with AI coding tools is exciting until the moment things start breaking. You ask for a small change and suddenly 3 other features stop working. AI gets confused, misses edge cases, and loses track of your intent. The problem is not code generation. The problem is planning. That is why BrainGrid exists. BrainGrid acts as your product management agent. It writes clear specification, maps UX flows, asks the clarifying questions you forgot to ask, and breaks big ideas into engineering-grade tasks that AI coding tools can build reliably. It guides Cursor, Claude Code, Replit, Windsurf, and others so they deliver features that work and keep working. Founders use BrainGrid to build real AI-native SaaS products without a technical background. If you want reliable features instead of fragile prototypes, try BrainGrid for free at braingrid.ai. That's braingrid.ai. Today's episode is brought to you by .tech domains, and this one hits close to home. Back in 2016, when I was building my own tech startup, I went on the hunt for that elusive .com. Looked high, looked low, and guess what I found? Nothing. What I did find cost me an arm and a leg. So I did what every founder does under pressure. Threw in extra letters, settled for the less than optimal name. And here's what I wish someone had said to me back then. Noah, you're building a tech startup. Just get a .tech domain. Tech startup, .tech domain. It could not be more obvious. It tells investors, customers, and anyone who looks at your website, really, that tech is at the core of your build. And I've kicked myself plenty since, especially when I see the clean and sharp names tech companies have landed on .tech. Nothing.tech, 1x.tech, Aurora.tech, CES.tech, Ultra.tech, Alice.tech, Neon.tech, Blaze.tech, Pi.tech. You get the idea. So take it from someone who learned it the hard way. If you're building a tech startup, don't overthink it. Secure your .tech domain today from any registrar of your choice. Let's flip to scalability. And this is in the bread and butter of what you're building and how you're building it and everything you described with team. And I'm curious about how you approach thinking about scale from the beginning. And if there's been interesting areas where you've still had to fight it as you've grown.
I think scalability, at least in terms of the software and the platform we're building, that's always been a big piece of our vision here. I think a lot of software developers today are used to running one agent locally, something that they're like pair programming with. And it's a very familiar workflow for developers where you pick up a ticket, you like squint at your computer screen, open your IDE, figure out how am I going to build this thing. Except now you've got an agent working alongside of you, helping you go maybe 20, 30% faster. That's great. The AI is giving you a good lift, but it's a very linear lift. We've always been much more interested in what's going to be possible in the near future where you can get multiple agents working for each developer, right? Maybe even dozens of agents working simultaneously. And the developer is more of an orchestrator, right? So instead of focusing on agents that are running locally, directly on your file system on your computer, we've always been primarily focused on agents that are running each in their own sandbox, whether that's a Docker container running on your laptop or one running in like a Kubernetes pod in the cloud. And that allows you to run as many agents as you want, where they each have their own area. Because they have a sandbox, they're not going to delete all the files in your hard drive or do something, that's going to hurt your environment. And they're also not going to step on each other's toes, right? They each have their own copy of the code base. They each have their own file system, their own terminal, et cetera. So it's a much more scalable way of working with agents. And particularly if you're working in the cloud now, everybody on your team can run as many agents as they want. You can run agents that aren't owned by any particular team member in the cloud. It's a much more fun, much more scalable way of working with agents for doing especially rote maintenance and tech debt type work at scale, like making sure you're managing your dependencies, resolving vulnerabilities, adding type annotations, things like that. Can really be done at another level of scale by working in the cloud and giving each agent its own sandbox. But yeah, I think the other half of scalability is how we scale the company itself. And that's been a really interesting and fun problem for me to solve on the fly. We've grown from maybe 13 people towards the end of last year to now we're up to 30. And it's been really interesting to watch how the culture changes and evolves as we scale up, and making sure we're still being very rigorous with how we evaluate new candidates, making sure that they're not only technically very competent, but also align with our values, that they're kind people, that they are the sort of like highly open, highly agentic people that we want working at OpenHands. I think that's going to continue to be a challenge as we do another doubling in the headcount.
Robert, as you step out on the balcony, you look across all that you've built thus far with OpenHands. What are you most proud of?
The thing that I feel really good about is our SDK. It's called the Software Agent SDK. We launched that towards the end of last year. And it's the thing that when I look at it, it's very clear to me that this is a best-in-class offering. It's completely differentiated from anything else that's on the market. And what's really cool about it is that we're seeing both individual developers and brand new startups and like very big companies with like tens of thousands of engineers building on top of this SDK to create brand new developer experiences. So essentially the genesis of this SDK was we had this mono repo, the OpenHands GitHub repo, where we just accumulated a bunch of code over the course of about a year and a half through the open source community. We have 500 or so contributors in our ecosystem, and this code base just grew into this spaghetti monster of code. It had a front end, it had a back end, there was a CLI, there was all the like agent code for actually solving these software problems. And we made this very hard decision towards the end of 2025 that, hey, like we need to pause and factor out all of the agent code into its own place. And that became the Software Agent SDK. So all of the code around what are the prompts that we're using to drive this thing forward? How is it interacting with the file system? How is it interacting with the terminal? How is it getting sandboxed? What's that like agent loop like? How is it managing its context window? Our security analyzers, basically everything you need to run a software agent goes into this Software Agent SDK. And then the front end and our GitHub integration, our Slack integration, our CLI all become consumers of this SDK. So those are like more the like last mile developer interfaces. But the SDK now contains basically everything you would need to build an agentic developer experience. And we've seen one large public company that has built like an internal vibe coding platform for their customers to let their customers take advantage of their technology. So their forward deployed engineers now use this on a daily basis to help their customers write code that interfaces with their systems. That was super cool to see. There's a small, like lovable competitor that's coming up now. They just got their seed round. They're building on top of the OpenHands SDK in order to power their vibe coding platform. I've built my own developer workstation using the OpenHands SDK, just as this is how I want to work. It really gives you all the nuts and bolts, all the Lego bricks you would need to build whatever kind of developer experience you want that would be powered by agents.
Okay, let's flip the script a little bit. Tell me about a mistake you made and how you and your team responded to it.
Yeah, I would say playing off that same theme, we went way too long just building up tech debt in this mono repo, right? I think one of the tricky things about having a popular open source project is that you're constantly getting contributions from the community. These contributions are often from folks who aren't fully familiar with the code base. They might introduce some redundancy. They might introduce some subtle bugs. We were getting just overwhelmed with code review. That's actually become a harder problem today in the AI-driven era, because it becomes really cheap for folks to open up a pull request, right? They're like, oh, I would love a Bitbucket integration. And they just ask OpenHands to do it. And OpenHands generates a bunch of code, and they might give it a cursory glance. They might not look at it at all. They might not even run the code to make sure that it works. And they open up a pull request, and then it's on us to make sure it works and get it merged. And because we were getting all of these pull requests, we were doing our best to do code review and validate them, but we ended up with this very big, hairy code base with a lot of tech debt that accumulated over time. And I think it took us a little too long to finally just decide, hey, we need to break this thing up. We need to spend a couple months just paying down a bunch of tech debt, ripping out this, basically trying to separate concerns of this agentic stuff away from this web UI, away from the CLI interface. So I wish we'd architected things a little bit more cleanly in the beginning so that we had really clear separations of concerns.
This episode is sponsored by Mesmo. If you're responsible for reliability, performance, or platform architecture, you already know the problem. Telemetry volume is growing faster than teams can manage it. Mesmo addresses this by moving observability upstream. Instead of storing everything and asking questions later, Mesmo processes telemetry in motion, filtering, transforming, and enriching logs, metrics, and traces before they reach your observability backend. The result is cleaner data, reduced ingestion costs, and faster root cause analysis using the tools you already rely on. Mesmo integrates with platforms like Datadog, Dynatrace, and open source stacks, giving teams more control without adding operational overhead. This is especially useful for platform engineers and SREs supporting complex distributed systems where context and speed matter. To see how active telemetry works in practice, get a demo at mesmo.com/codestory. That's MEZMO.com/codestory. This episode is sponsored by Unblocked. Your coding agents have access to your code base. Maybe you even connected other tools via MCPs. But access doesn't mean context. Agents can't reason across MCPs. They don't know your architectural decisions, your team's patterns, or why the API was shaped the way it is. So agents look in the wrong place and deliver bad outputs. Then you spend time correcting. More loops, more tokens. Unblocked is the context layer your agents are missing. It synthesizes your PRs, docs, Slack, and tickets into organizational context that agents actually understand. So they make better plans, write higher quality code, use fewer tokens, and require fewer correction loops. If you're running Claude Code, Cursor, or any agentic workflow, Unblocked is worth a look. Learn more at getunblocked.com/codestory. Okay, let's move forward then. What does the future look like for OpenHands? The industry's changing. You're primed and ripe and ready to go take on the world. What does the future look like for the product and for your team?
Yeah, I think I'll start by talking about what the future of software development looks like, because that's really what we're trying to create. I think today we're just seeing the first innings of how large language models are changing the software developers' experience. I think we started with just tab completion, which was very familiar to developers. We'd been using autocomplete for decades, and it just got a million times better when powered by LLMs. I think we pretty quickly graduated to these local agents working on your laptop as a pair programmer. Where we really see the future is agents that are running in the cloud with their own sandbox and running multiple agents per developer, getting a lot more done than you can in a more pair programming model. And I think that's really the future we're trying to build. I would say we've always been at the edge of what's possible, working mainly with the early adopters, rather than trying to play for the median developer. And I would say the trade-off being we're doing less work to meet the developer where they live today, inside their IDE and on the CLI. And we're doing a lot more work to help the early adopters really plot out what the future of software development looks like. So yeah, I think if our plans come to fruition and my wildest dreams come true, OpenHands becomes essentially the open source standard for how you run these agents at scale in production. We're going to need a Kubernetes for agents. We're going to need a Linux for agents, right? There has to be an open standard for how you define and drive and monitor these agents at scale, both within an enterprise and as an individual developer. And I think OpenHands is we're the largest open source project that has a full end-to-end solution there. It's not just a CLI, right? It's all the cloud infrastructure you need. It's all the scalability things, all the sandboxing, et cetera, all the security. That I think I'd like to see OpenHands really become the standard there and have engineers all over the world trained on how to use OpenHands effectively.
Okay, Robert, let's flip to you. Let's switch to you. Who influences the way that you work? Name a person or many persons or something you look up to and why.
I get most of my inspiration just from watching the engineers on the OpenHands team work and seeing what they're doing and how they're being productive. We've built a really strong team of very smart people who are also very forward-thinking and very willing to experiment. Just this morning, I was looking at my co-founder, Graham, shared with me his daily workflow for making progress on his work with agents. A large markdown file with me that basically describes this whole workflow to an agent so that the agent can help him execute on this workflow. Just seeing how he works and how he is pushing the envelope with how he works with agents. He's at the bleeding edge of what's possible here. He's not only got a company that's at the forefront here, he's been working on code gen for over a decade within academia. So he's very well attuned to what's possible here. I think he's been a huge inspiration for me in terms of pushing out the art of the possible when it comes to agents.
Robert, last question. So you're getting on a plane and you're sitting next to a young entrepreneur who's built the next big thing. They're jazzed about it and they can't wait to show it off to the world, and can't wait to show it off to you right there on a plane. What advice do you give that person, having gone down this road a bit?
I think the biggest thing is just enjoy the ride, right? It's easy to get caught up in plotting out the end game and figuring out what am I going to do with my $1 billion once I exit, or what's it going to feel like when we've got however much in revenue and however many engineers. Those early days are the most fun days. I think as much fun as I'm having with OpenHands today as a team of 30 and starting to scale up revenue and all that, the most fun I had was in those early days, those first 6 weeks of prototyping and working with the community, and before we even raised our first round. It's just such an exciting time when you know you've got something really special and valuable on your hands. And so making sure you're enjoying the ride rather than getting overly focused on the destination, I think is very important.
Couldn't agree more. That's fantastic advice. Robert, thank you for being on the show today. Thank you for telling the creation story of OpenHands.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And this concludes another chapter of Code Story. Code Story is hosted and produced by Noah Labhart. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcasting app of your choice. And when you get a chance, leave us a review. Both things help us out tremendously. And thanks again for listening.
Working across teams is tough, but Asana helps you handle it. That's because Asana is where humans and AI coordinate work together. AI can spot roadblocks and assign work in a snap, so everything and everyone stays on track. That's how work gets handled. That's Asana. Visit us at asana.com. That's ASANA.com.
Some of the best lessons don't come from a classroom. They come from experience. On The Power of Advice, a new podcast series from Capital Group, you'll hear from CEOs, investors, and founders about how they built careers, took risks, and reinvented themselves. If you're starting your own journey, this is the kind of advice you won't want to miss. Available wherever you get your podcasts. Published by Capital Client Group, Inc.